Eupalinos, a story of young Pythagoras. Prologue. The tyrant's shadow. On the sun-drenched island of Samos, where the Aegean winds whispered legends of distant shores and drowned empires, there reigned a tyrant named Polycrates. His ambition, vast as the sea itself, was matched only by an uncanny, almost unsettling fortune. Unlike the crude warlords of neighboring isles who placed their faith solely in bronze shields and sharpened spears, Polycrates grasped the fluid power of ships, how their painted eyes could watch over trade routes, how their swift hulls could forge alliances across sparkling waters, and how their very presence projected strength far beyond the stony beaches of his domain. Through shrewd diplomacy that courted the burgeoning power of Persia and an undeniable mastery of the sea, he had riveted his rule upon Samos. It was said the gods themselves smiled upon him, though perhaps it was a smile tinged with capricious irony. Once, seized by a rare, calculated tremor of humility before the unseen forces governing mortal lives, he cast his most cherished possession, a signet ring of exquisite emerald and gold, into the unfathomable depths. Days later, it returned, improbably nestled within the belly of a fish served upon his own table. Such luck, the island elders murmured behind cupped hands, was a perilous gift, often foreshadowing a divine reckoning. Yet Polycrates craved more than fortune's fleeting embrace. He yearned for a legacy etched in stone and memory. Thus, when his keenly observant advisers discovered a boy, an orphan whose mind seemed to dance with the elegant certainty of numbers, while others his age fumbled with wooden swords, the tyrant saw not a child, but a tool, a vessel. This one, Polycrates declared, a calculating glint in his eye, as the boy unravelled logical knots that had confounded the island's most learned scholars, possesses a mind sharp enough to carve our name into eternity. He will bring glory to Samos. And so Pythagoras, barely 10 summers old, his past erased, became the adopted son of the most potent and unpredictable man in the Aegean, stepping into the gilded cage of the tyrant's favour. The mountain's challenge. Water was the lifeblood of Samos, yet its flow was precarious. The burgeoning city clustered around Polycrates' fortified palace strained the island's known springs. Beyond the sprawling settlement loomed Mount Kastro, a rugged spine of rock brooding under the relentless sun. Hidden on its far side lay a powerful, untapped spring, a source whispered to hold enough water to sustain the city for generations, if only it could be reached. Circling the mountain would take years, Polycrates stated, his impatience a palpable force in the council chamber. His gaze swept over his advisers. And an aqueduct snaking around its flank? An invitation to our enemies, a fragile artery easily severed. The solution he envisioned was as audacious as his own rise to power, a tunnel driven straight through the mountain's heart, a subterranean conduit connecting the hidden spring directly to the thirsty city. But Kastro was formidable, a monolithic guardian. Digging from one side alone was a task for decades, perhaps a lifetime. Polycrates, ever restless, demanded speed. "We shall pierce it from both sides simultaneously," he announced, the sheer arrogance of the command silencing the room. "The passages will meet precisely in the middle." Uneasy glances flickered between his advisers. Sweat beaded on foreheads. Such a feat of engineering was unheard of, defying the limits of sanity and known techniques. The likelihood of 2 tunnels, burrowing blind through solid rock, failing to align, missing each other by yards, even tens of yards, was not merely a risk, it seemed a certainty. Polycrates, dismissing their unspoken fears, summoned Eupalinos of Megara. The name itself carried weight, synonymous with ingenuity, the greatest engineer in all Ionia, a man whose structures seemed to negotiate with gravity itself. "Can it be done?" the tyrant asked, his voice deceptively level, challenging the impossible. Eupalinos, a man whose weathered face held the quiet concentration of stone, stroked his beard, his eyes distant, already mapping the mountain's unseen depths. Perhaps, tyrant. But the method? It requires thought. Precision beyond measure. You have until the next full moon to devise it, Polycrates snapped, his tolerance for deliberation thin. Begin your preparations. That night, unnoticed in the shadowed alcoves of the great hall, young Pythagoras sat, still as carved marble, absorbing every syllable, the audacious challenge echoing in the chambers of his uniquely ordered mind. The master and the boy. Eupalinos established his workshop near the mountain's brooding base. Papyrus scrolls, marked with complex diagrams and nascent calculations, soon covered every available surface. Workers bustled, carrying measuring rods and bronze tools, their footsteps echoing the engineer's mounting anxiety. Results were agonizingly slow. The mountain guarded its secrets well. With each passing day, the lines on Eupalinos's face deepened, mirroring the intractable problem before him. On the seventh day, as Eupalinos stared with near despair at a topographical sketch of Kastro, a shadow fell across the parchment. "You approach the problem from the wrong angle," stated a voice, clear and unervingly certain. Eupalinos looked up, startled, into the intense, focused eyes of the tyrant's young ward. Pythagoras stood before him, barely tall enough to see comfortably over the edge of the heavy wooden table. "Is that so, little scholar?" the engineer asked, a weary smile touching his lips, more amused than offended. "And what might you know of burrowing through mountains?" "Nothing of tunnels, Master Eupalinos," Pythagoras admitted readily. "But I know a great deal about triangles." Eupalinos chuckled, a dry, tired sound. Yet something in the boy's unwavering gaze, a calm confidence utterly devoid of childish arrogance, made him pause. "Intriguing. Show me." Pythagoras picked up a stick of charcoal, his small hand surprisingly steady. On a blank sheet of parchment, he drew a simple triangle. "The mountain is not a heavenly titan," he began, his voice quiet but resonant. "It possesses form. It is a shape. And all shapes, master, adhere to unchanging rules." 4 hours, an unlikely dialogue unfolded. The boy spoke not of rock and earth, but of the immutable relationships between angles and sides, of ratios and proportions that held true whether sketching in sand or measuring the heavens. He spoke of how lines, extended infinitely, maintained their course. Eupalinos, initially indulging the boy, found himself leaning closer, his skepticism slowly dissolving, replaced by a dawning, almost reluctant, wonder as the child's crystalline logic unfolded, step by elegant step. "How?" Eupalinos finally asked, his voice rough with astonishment. "How did you come by this knowledge?" Pythagoras tilted his head, considering. "I don't learn it," he replied simply. "I see it. The numbers live within the patterns, in the spiral of seeds within a pomegranate, in the perfect curve of a nautilus shell, in the precise distance between the stars." That night, sleep eluded Eupalinos. Pacing his workshop under the lamplight, he rigorously tested the boy's geometric propositions, checking calculations against known landmarks on the mountain's slopes. By the pale light of dawn, his initial amazement had solidified into unwavering conviction. He sought an immediate audience with Polycrates. "Tyrant," Eupalinos stated, dispensing with pleasantries, "I require the boy." Polycrates raised an eyebrow. "Pythagoras? What use has a child in the digging of a tunnel?" "This child," Eupalinos declared, his voice ringing with newfound certainty, "sees the invisible lines that shape the world. He sees the path through the stone, the method." The weeks that followed presented an extraordinary spectacle on the slopes of Mount Kastro, the most renowned engineer in Ionia walking side by side with a young boy, placing marker stones, sighting along plumb lines, measuring angles with rudimentary instruments, and debating complex geometric proofs like seasoned colleagues. Workers, accustomed to shouted commands and brute force, whispered amongst themselves. Had the great Eupalinos lost his mind? Was he placing his faith in childish drawings? But Polycrates, intrigued by his engineer's unshakable confidence and the sheer novelty of the situation, allowed the strange collaboration to continue. What emerged from this partnership was not just a plan, but the birth of a revolutionary methodology, poised to redefine the possibilities of engineering. Guided by Pythagoras, they established a precise baseline on each side of the mountain, meticulously aligned with the intended entrances and the tunnel's desired path. From these two known lines, Pythagoras envisioned a network of interconnected triangles, a conceptual grid that could map the mountain's contours and internal structure from both perspectives simultaneously. If we know the exact angle of our tunnel's path relative to this baseline, Pythagoras explained to Eupalinos, pointing to a diagram, and if the workers maintain that precise angle as they dig inward, then mathematically the two passages must converge. But the mountain is not uniform parchment, Eupalinos countered, practical concerns surfacing. We will encounter varying densities of rock, fault lines, water seepage. The path could deviate despite our best efforts. Then we must verify our position constantly, Pythagoras responded without hesitation. At regular intervals, perhaps every 10 paces, the tunnellers will carve a narrow vertical shaft directly upwards. Using geometry, we can calculate precisely where that shaft should emerge on the mountain surface if we remain true to our path. The system possessed an elegant, self-correcting logic. On the surface, specialized teams would locate the openings of these check shafts. If a shaft emerged slightly off its predicted mark, the angle of the tunnel below could be subtly adjusted, correcting deviations before they compounded into significant errors. Yet, the most striking innovation stemmed from a deceptively simple device Pythagoras conceived, a length of hollow reed, carefully straightened and filled almost entirely with water, then sealed at both ends with beeswax, trapping a single, small air bubble. When the reed was held perfectly level, the bubble would float precisely in its center. With this, Pythagoras demonstrated, holding the reed steady, the foreman can maintain a true horizontal level within the tunnels, irrespective of the uneven rock floor, the disorienting darkness, or the slope of the passage. Eupalinos took the rudimentary level, tilting it gently, watching in fascination as the bubble slid smoothly, unerringly indicating the horizontal plane. This simple reed. It's extraordinary. It is merely geometry made tangible, Pythagoras replied, his gaze distant. Lines yearn to be straight. Circles strive for perfect roundness. Water seeks its own level. We are not imposing our will upon the mountain, Master Eupalinos. We are merely asking it, through the language of numbers, to reveal its inherent form. The tunneling begins. Work commenced under the auspicious gaze of the gods, or at least, under the watchful eye of Polycrates. The tyrant himself, amidst ceremonial pomp, struck the first symbolic blow against the northern face of Mount Kastro with a silver pickaxe, while a trusted proxy performed the identical ritual on the southern side. Eupalinos directed the immense logistical effort, coordinating hundreds of laborers, toolsmiths, and surveyors. But it was Pythagoras, a small, serious figure darting between the work crews with his reed level and measuring cords, who oversaw the critical calculations, his youthful presence an anomaly amidst the sweat and grime. The days bled into weeks, the weeks into months. Inside the mountain, the air grew thick with dust and the clang of metal on stone. The tunnels crept forward, inch by agonizing inch, guided by the boys' geometry and the vigilant checks from the surface teams. When doubt inevitably surfaced among the exhausted workers, whispers in the dark about the impossibility of meeting, fears of being lost forever within the mountain's gut, Pythagoras would patiently demonstrate with his charcoal and parchment, showing how the surface measurements confirmed time and again that they remained true to the calculated path. "But how can you be so certain, boy?" one grizzled foreman asked, his voice raspy with dust and skepticism. "Because numbers do not lie," Pythagoras answered, his conviction unwavering. "They are constant. They are the same truth here in the heart of Samos as they are in Egypt or distant Persia. 2 + 2 = 4, always and everywhere." The labourers began to regard the boy with a complex mixture of awe and apprehension. Some whispered that he was touched by Apollo, the god of reason and light. Others claimed, more fearfully, that he communed directly with the spirit of the mountain itself. Eupalinos knew better. He recognized in Pythagoras something far rarer and perhaps more powerful than divine favor, a mind capable of perceiving the underlying mathematical harmony beneath the chaotic veil of the physical world. One evening, checking calculations by the flickering lamplight deep within the northern tunnel, Eupalinos looked at the boy, whose face was smudged with grime but whose eyes shone with intellectual fervor. "Where does it truly come from, Pythagoras?" he asked quietly. This sight you possess?" Pythagoras fell silent for a long moment, the rhythmic dripping of water the only sound. "I don't know," he admitted finally, his voice softer than usual. "But I feel it, like a musician feels the shape of the next note before it is played. A resonance, a rightness." "You are fortunate," Eupalinos murmured, contemplating the weight of such a gift. "No," Pythagoras replied, a surprising shadow crossing his young face. "Fortune is like Polycrates' ring, found and lost by chance. This feels different. It feels eternal. The meeting of waters." The day the calculations predicted the meeting point would be reached arrived thick with anticipation. A palpable tension hung in the humid air of both tunnels. Workers on each side ceased their digging, listening intently. Faintly, unmistakably, they could hear the scraping sounds, the muffled taps of the other team's picks through the final thin barrier of rock. Pythagoras stood beside Eupalinos at the northern face, his expression outwardly calm, but his hands were clasped tightly behind his back, knuckles white. "If our calculations are off by even a fraction," Eupalinos breathed, the enormity of potential failure weighing heavily upon him. "They are not," Pythagoras stated, his quiet certainty a counterpoint to the engineer's anxiety. The final wall of rock separating the two tunnels was now perilously thin. On Eupalinos' signal, the exhausted workers stepped back, their faces upturned in the lamplight. Eupalinos himself took up a heavy pickaxe. With careful, deliberate strokes, honed by years of experience, he began to chip away at the fragile barrier. A hairline crack appeared, dark against the grey stone. Then another spider-webbed outwards. A collective intake of breath seemed to suck the air from the tunnel. Then, with a sound less like shattering rock and more like a deep, subterranean sigh, the wall crumbled inwards. Through the newly formed opening, illuminated by lamps from the other side, trickled a stream of clear, cool water, the lifeblood of the hidden spring sought for so long. It flowed hesitantly at first, then gathered strength, mingling the dust of the two passages, physically uniting the north and south tunnels into one continuous conduit. A roar erupted from the workers on both sides, echoing through the newly joined passage, a wave of relief, triumph, and sheer exhaustion. Eupalinos, his face streaked with sweat and dust, slowly lowered the pickaxe. He turned to Pythagoras. The boy's face, usually so serious, was illuminated by a profound, quiet joy. "You did this, Pythagoras," the engineer said, his voice thick with emotion and admiration. "We did this, Master Eupalinos," Pythagoras corrected gently, his gaze meeting the engineer's. "Knowledge shared is knowledge amplified. The tyrant's price." News of the tunnel's miraculous completion blazed across Samos. Polycrates, seizing the moment, declared a magnificent feast to celebrate what would undoubtedly be heralded as one of the engineering wonders of the age. His wonder, Amidst the boisterous festivities, Eupalinos was summoned before the tyrant's elevated dais. Expecting the public recognition, the promised lands, the substantial purse of gold whispered about since the project's inception, the engineer approached with the quiet pride of a master craftsman whose impossible task was done. "Eupalinos of Megara," Polycrates announced, his voice amplified by the hall's acoustics. "Samos is indebted to your service. Your skill has given us life." He gestured, and a servant presented Eupalinos not with deeds or sacks of coin, but with a single ornate silver bowl, handsome, certainly, but a mere token, an almost contemptuous gesture given the scale of the achievement and the rumoured promises. Eupalinos stood frozen for a moment, the bowl heavy in his hands. "My lord Polycrates," he said, choosing his words with extreme care, "the undertaking was significant. I was led to understand the reward would reflect its magnitude." Polycrates' smile remained fixed, chillingly pleasant. "And so it does, Eupalinos. The glory of this achievement, forever associated with your name, and mine, is a reward far exceeding mere gold. Surely, a man of your dedication wrought this marvel for the love of the craft itself." A ripple of unease spread through the assembled courtiers. The blatant discrepancy between expectation and reality was stark. Everyone knew, or suspected, the original terms had been far more generous. From his designated place at a side table, Pythagoras observed the exchange, the wine tasting like ash in his mouth. The calculated injustice turned his stomach. His young face, usually alight with intellectual curiosity, hardened into lines of disillusionment. Later that night, long after the forced merriment had subsided, Pythagoras sought out his adoptive father in his private chambers. "You gave Eupalinos your word," Pythagoras stated baldly, dispensing with the deference expected of him. Polycrates turned from gazing at the moonlit sea, his expression unreadable. "I am the tyrant of Samos," he replied, his voice soft but laced with steel. "My word is precisely what I say it is, at any given moment." "Then your word," Pythagoras countered, his voice trembling slightly, not with fear, but with outrage, "is ultimately worthless." The words hung in the suddenly still air, sharp and dangerous as obsidian shards. Polycrates' eyes narrowed, studying the boy who dared challenge him. "Mind your place, Pythagoras. You exist here by my grace, fed by my hand, and Eupalinos exists here by your summons." Pythagoras retorted, years of suppressed observations fueling his indignation. "He gave you a miracle channeled through stone, and you repaid him with an empty silver bowl. Is that the measure of your justice?" "Enough!" Polycrates roared, his mask of calm shattering. "Return to your numbers and your scrolls. This affair is beyond your concern." But it concerned Pythagoras profoundly. It struck at the very core of the order and truth he revered. That same night, under the cloak of darkness, he found Eupalinos packing his few essential belongings, his precision tools, his irreplaceable charts, his personal journals. Without a word needing to be spoken, Pythagoras helped the engineer carry his precious instruments down to the harbour, arranging discreet passage on a merchant ship bound for the Ionian mainland before dawn. As they parted on the dimly lit quay, the scent of salt and tar heavy in the air, Eupalinos clasped the boy's shoulder. "You risk a great deal for me, Pythagoras. The tyrant's wrath is not easily escaped." "Some truths demand risks," Pythagoras replied, his voice steady, echoing the certainty he found in numbers. "You taught me that, Master Eupalinos, when you dared to trust geometry and dig into the mountain's heart." Epilogue: The Path of Exile. Polycrates' fury upon discovering Eupalinos's clandestine departure was a cold, controlled storm, more terrifying than any open rage. Though direct proof was lacking, his sharp, suspicious gaze fell immediately upon his adopted son. The boy's known admiration for the engineer, coupled with his recent outburst, made him the obvious accomplice. "You disappoint me, boy," the tyrant said days later, his voice devoid of warmth. "I plucked you from obscurity. I gave you sanctuary, tutors, access to knowledge few could dream of. You offered shelter and learning, that is true," Pythagoras acknowledged, meeting the tyrant's gaze without flinching. "But you did not offer truth. And what truth have I denied you, boy philosopher?" Polycrates sneered. "The truth that justice weighs more than power. That integrity is the bedrock of any lasting structure, whether built of stone or promises. That a word kept honors both giver and receiver." Polycrates studied the young man standing before him. The boy he had taken in was gone, replaced by someone whose certainty seemed rooted not in youthful arrogance, but in some deeper, unshakable principle. It was this unwavering core, this internal compass Polycrates could neither understand nor manipulate, that unsettled him most. "You have learned much of numbers and lines," the tyrant conceded finally, a chilling finality in his tone. "But perhaps too little of the messy, compromised world they inhabit. It is time you broadened your education." The exile was never named as such. It was presented as a prestigious opportunity, advanced studies in the ancient wisdom centers of Egypt, perhaps later Babylonia, lands where mathematics and mysticism intertwined. An educational voyage. But both knew the reality. It was banishment, a velvet glove removing a perceived threat, a dissonant note in the tyrant's carefully orchestrated symphony of power. As Pythagoras boarded the ship, its sails impatient for the wind, he cast a final look back at Samos. His gaze lingered on the slopes of Mount Kastro, where beneath the serene exterior his calculations held true. Water, clear and essential, now flowed through the hidden tunnel, bringing life and sustenance to the city, a testament to reason's power. His first great work. His first tangible proof that the physical world would yield its secrets to the precise language of mathematics. In the long years of wandering and study that followed, leading him eventually to Croton in Magna Graecia, where he would establish his brotherhood and school, Pythagoras would often reflect on the Tunnel of Eupalinos. He remembered the daunting challenge, the excitement of true collaboration, the betrayal, but most vividly, the underlying principle. How two distinct paths, guided solely by geometric truth and unwavering measurement, could converge with perfect accuracy in the blind darkness beneath a mountain. It became a foundational lesson, woven into the fabric of his philosophy and teaching, that unwavering rationality could penetrate the densest obstacles, that an underlying harmony existed even within the apparent chaos of the world, waiting to be discovered, that sometimes the truest, straightest path was not the one immediately visible, but the one calculated with courage and integrity. History would remember Pythagoras for the theorem bearing his name, for the mystical significance of the tetracties, for his insights into musical harmony and the ordered cosmos. But perhaps it truly began there, on Samos, with a boy who helped pierce a mountain, who dared to defy a tyrant, and who chose, irrevocably, to follow the straight line of truth, wherever it might lead.